perspective may be marginally different, as much as I'm trying to make a living in animation full time. And I have worked almost all my professional life since about 1985-86, doing graphics, graphic images, animation, and illustration work. And during this time, I worked at places like Artman, for Bermuda Shorts, and various other things. And all the time, because, like when I went to do Artman at the early 90s, it was at the end of a really interesting period where there was a kind of democratization of media. What had happened was the speed of computers had got to from the stage where people could do typesetting to word processing, and then into bitmap-based image editing, into slowly getting into actual moving real-time video about in a small way. And so over each of these stages, it was a sort of industry disruptor for each of those industries that it moved through. And there's one of my favourite quotes, and I can't be sure exactly who said it was, that everybody should have to can write books, but nobody should have to read them. And with this democratization, it doesn't necessarily give people the skills to write story or have the skills and input into those things. Now, I have had the pleasure and good fortune to work with some astonishing animators and filmmakers. And when you see the skills that they've put into these things, AI comes up and everybody starts getting very jumpy. If you start go online and you actually look and see what Aaron Blaze is saying about his experience of looking at AI stuff, he's excited because he actually says, oh, well, in 1937, people were rotoscoping like crazy. Not only were they rotoscoping, they were copying pieces of action from one film into another film. So they wanted, this was thing, but this was being driven by, economic imperative, etc. So you sort of say, there's all these things about AI, and you sort of think, well, actually, if you look at the production process, part of my thing was I worked on the commercials, and when you are working on commercials, everybody wants a different style. Practically, this is how you sell a commercial. So what happens is you sort of think, right, what we've got to do is we've got to assemble these things, and you're looking all the time. You're looking at, how do we get the new look? How do we get this? How do we put this together? How do we make it impactful? And the novelty, and in the budgets in the 90s gave you the ability to experiment and do things. Admittedly, it was the kind of, I don't know if people know the 2 from 3 rule, which is money, time, or art. You can only ever have two of them. Well, I think this is very true. And I was involved in the first 3 commercials that Artman ever did on computer. And when that happened, I went into Artman because I've been involved in I've taught myself how to do stuff in CG. And someone put up a poster on the wall, which they printed out themselves, which said, what can a computer do? It can draw a square. And they'd stuck this on the wall as this kind of protest about what computers could do. Fairly shortly after I was in there, people wanted to know how they could replace plates and put stuff in the background, etc., and do the combining and compositing. And the other thing that was happening is when you moved into 3D, you suddenly were reliant on building rigs, because people hadn't really done rigging on 2D structures. People have done animation and sort of like limited animation, like out of Hanna-Barbera and those 50s things, where you were using reuse and stuff like that. But it was the first time in 3D where you were actually building stuff. And then that moved into building 2D rigs. Now, 2D rigs have, over the last 20 years, have almost invariably been vector-based images, like vector forms. But that's changing. So what's happening is bitmap stuff and rigging of drawn things is getting better and better, and you can build quite complex 2D, sort of very watercolory, all sorts of things. I mean, you look at what's happened with the kind of like Quentin Blake things that were done up north, stuff like that. That's starting to look good. Now, through each of these processes, there has been, if you actually look at them all individually, a lot of them have been aided by machine learning. You know, like whether there be filters for, you know, like converting imagery, or now a lot of stuff is in 3D. A lot of stuff was done with motion capture and the editing of motion capture data and applying it to 3D forms. And whether you like that or not, it's not far away from Disney rotoscoping. Motion capture data is basically a form of rotoscoping. You can see it that way. So what bits of it are difficult, because it's I mean, it's happening. It's at the moment it's pretty primitive, and if you actually look at the individual components of building a piece of animation, it's not that useful in a lot of places. When you actually look at the sort of sections, I mean, you can generate an image, you can generate a character, but you can't even generate a turnaround for doing different views. You can do audio, you can do temporary audio for lip sync. It does do lip sync now, and lip sync's been available within the Adobe products for about 5-7 years, something like that, in Character Animator and Animate, and actually quite good. So because I work largely on my own, I'm keeping my eye on this stuff, because I'm trying to work out how to make my production cycle economically possible in very difficult times. These are difficult times for animators particularly, and broadcasters. I mean, what's happening is it's a bit like the NHS being screwed over. You know, that's what's happened to the public broadcasters here. So what's happened is that you're trying to work out how can these things be done, and you take it on. And of course, I have been checking, there are some software sites where you can check online to see whether your stuff has been included in models, AI models. And my stuff has been included in AI models. So I've like pasted up, please do, you know, like the please opt out. And I have avoided over the last 10-15 years putting my stuff online anyway, because I just try and avoid social media as well. It's one of the things I do. So I don't know, there is an enormous amount of theft. There is absolutely theft. It cannot be denied. When the woman from YouTube or Google was cornered about, have you been scraping AI video? She just looked embarrassed and said, oh, I don't know. But there was clearly bollocks. What has happened with, there in the ChatGPT, there is a section called Books 2. And Books 2 are probably between 11 and 25,000 copyright works they've put in illegally and included in the models. You only have to say, do something in the style of Martin Amis, and you'll start getting some aping of those things out, and you can start to get things. So it is very clear that these things have been done. Now, what my worry is, or one of the big worries is, that the creative industries are very unimportant to government in terms of lobbying, and not enough noise is being made. I think a serious amount of noise needs to be made, because otherwise the people that are going to influence it are going to be the defence industry, security, and things like Chatham House. They are going to be the political things that come in on it. What they don't really look at, and there's characters like Mars, Blue Zoo, and Dave Sprox and ex-Aardman, who've been lobbying around tax breaks for animation. And the same people are now trying to lobby against, exploitation in AI models. But we're a small country, a small power. It's much more likely to happen in France, because they're going to get them a shirt in there. I don't know what can be done, but I would say take action if you can. And what I don't think that people quite realise is that the welcoming of ChatGPT into your life is a very strange thing to do, because who has just been appointed to the board of ChatGPT? One of the senior executives from CIA. Elon Musk has just withdrawn his objection to what's happened at ChatGPT, and the speculation is that the American government has lent on him. And what has happened is that basically the NSA and various other people are plugging into the back of it, and all of that is coming into our lives or taking away from us. So that is more important in their minds than anything to do with creative industries. And it worries, it does worry me. I mean, I think there's a personal privacy. These people do not have this right into our lives, but we allow it, and we should not allow it. We should close it down. They are our government. They're not theirs. The question is, where's the money? But you see, you look in the States, what's happening at the moment, just in the elections, where people are putting money into the Republican Party. It's all the big boys with money, because what they're doing is it's all about the preservation of their money. It's about building bigger vacuum cleaners to suck more into their big coffers. But I feel mixed. It is there are some astonishing tools. At the moment, it's deeply frustrating. And someone asked me, will you be using it? And the question, I said, well, my USP is I can draw. So I may as well try and use that. I mean, if you're trying to bang out another Peppa Pig, which is simple vector forms, or any of those things, well, what is differentiated in terms of the animation? Okay, you get style down. You could probably stylistically put together Peppa Pig using something like that. But actually, what is more important is actually the story behind it. And at the moment, if you look at the way the story is constructed using ChatGPT or Claude, they're not that great. They're not that great. And besides, what is it that you're trying to do? It may be that there's not enough money in animation for the tools to go in that direction. Because actually, what are the tools, how many copies of, like, say, Toon Blue get bought in the UK? Or, the cartoon animators and things like that. It's not big money, and those things are incredibly expensive. And when lots of people are closing down the data sets to these people, it may be that it becomes prohibitive. And also there's that whole kind of ecology of it. I mean, the ecological aspect of it. Someone quoted me that it's between 1,000 and 50,000 times more energy is used in making an inquiry using ChatGPT than doing a search in Google. I mean, what's the morality of that? The state we're in? I don't know. So, I have mixed feelings. That's my view. I have, so about 3-4 weeks ago, I was going to the CMC, which is the Children's Media Conference in Sheffield, and I was pitching a new animation. And before, I noticed that AI was on the agenda for a couple of talks. And in the corner of one of the talks, it's had a link to, we will be discussing our workshop that we'll be holding in London. So I decided to go to the workshop. Anyway, very interesting. Held in a very large law firm in central London. And 40 people from creative industries, and I mean, some fairly big people were there. we were divided into teams for the day and asked to push how far we could take AI in a day on a creative product, you know, to see how far we could go. And it was fairly remarkable. But at the same time, you get banged up hard against the limitations. One of the things that we did was using there's a 2D engine that does manga and anime, and it is actually easier to generate a blue pig than a person other than Japanese or white. You know, like, it's been so trained on traditional anime that you can't, you know, break out of this. And this happens in lots of other areas as well where the model's done. So a lot of, I mean, but then there was sort of the problem, I don't know if people know about the black Nazis that Google locked up. So what happened was Google, on their image generation, thought, oh, you've got to make sure that it's open, to inclusive, and you could do a search on kind of generate me some pictures of Nazis from 1938 or something like that, and it would do sort of stormtroopers of African descent. So they had problems with that and they had to shut it down quick. But yeah, anyway, so that's my thoughts. That's where I am with it, pretty much.
Big round of applause. Now, so far, the impression I'm getting is that there's unanimous condemnation and distrust of AI systems and the motives for them in rather different ways. Now, Ruth, you talked about someone producing a film that was festival quality. Can I come back to that in a second? I think, if it's okay, I'd love to hear more about that. Now, David, you were talking about broadly speaking, about how difficult it was in that particular case to produce anything using AI that was useful or any good. Broadly speaking, is that what you were saying?
For someone who's not a professional, not huge amounts of experience.
Because that's a very good point. Now, Alan, you were talking about the danger from, if you like, big business and hoovering up and the devaluing of the creative industries. So we've kind of got three slightly diverging but consistent points of view. Would that be fair to say? I've summarised this very badly, but is that broadly different strands? That's what I mean. But are in agreement.
I want to say I'm not anti-AI. I don't think I'm anti-AI, but I think if I was 30 years younger, I would be anti-AI. I just feel very glad to be old.
Don't feel like that, because AI is going to be a brilliant tool. It's just got to be AI that's a brilliant tool that is built into our society rather than takes it over.
Okay, I want that to hang in the air.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure.
For me as a creator, it's really important not to think in terms of either this or that, and to use it as a tool to do things that maybe other tools don't do. Like, for example, I've tried a few things and experimented a few things, and if I'm doing like a music video animation and I have like a little turnaround or a little transition that is a bit abstract, and I think that I can do generate 1 second, put 12 frames there, and I can start from my frame and do another, 11 frames, and it's still coming, because like the first few frames that generates, it stays linked to your style. It starts to kind of go more generic as it moves.
Okay.
So I used it a little bit like that, because why wouldn't I? It just kind of brings a different quirkiness to my video, and but it doesn't mean that this is like an AI video. It's just like maybe the transitions or the B-roll, the background, and why wouldn't I use that to complement as an assistant? So I like to think in the sense of like a little assistance in, or I see it, to be honest, just as a different tool, and it depends how you use it, because you can use it in so many different forms.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've also trained models with my own images, and kind of, it was really interesting because it generated little animations in my style, but not in my style. It kind of difficult to explain, and it's just so many things you can do. You can do that and then download the single frames and then put it back to After Effects, remove a few frames and put yours. So I found it to be very interesting for more abstract animation and for transitions. Yeah, for character is useless, because like what you said is like the characters are always blue and is always chibi and is always the same. So like all my characters I draw, and I either do Procreate Dreams or Puppet or Warp or whatever. But for like background effects, I find it to be really interesting. And if it exists, why wouldn't I use that to my advantage as a creator? Now, as for the ethical part of thing, like obviously if you're training your model, that's different. But if you're using their model and it's transformative and it's only the few first frames, is that bad? Is not bad? I don't know, because obviously it's like the same thing for a collage artist, that someone that is ethical will know how to use in a transformative way and is a new piece. Someone that is not ethical will just rip the whole piece. So I think that it's not about the tool, it's the person is using it, because you can rip someone off with AI, with Photoshop, or with a transfer paper, really.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe that's my
Or a
take.
contract.
So,
Or a contract, yes.
so you're saying that as a specific tool within parameters, there is good potential there.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you are like the director of your project, because you can do things without having to have a budget, a Disney budget. It can like help you do things that, I think is very good for special effects and abstract animation. And I think it's also creative if you know how to use it. There are apps, they are really generic and will create generic animation mediocre for mediocre audience, I suppose. But there is all kinds of apps that if you really learn how to program it, and it's not easy, it's not like press a button and it does. Like I've been experimenting with Deforum, which is like a Python notebook that uses AI, and you can use it, like I said, from the first frame, or you can put as many frames as you want and just generating. But there's so many things you can do. You have to program the camera movements, and until you get something good, it takes time. And it's in the end, like in my experience, it only worked for the effects and background. But if I have something really clear in my head, I find it better to draw. It keeps to my style, but I also like to bring a little spice. I use it a little extra spice. Why not? That's maybe my take.
So if I'm getting this right, Alan, your general view is that the evil occurs in the industry where mediocre is produced, and people.
I don't know. I mean, it's blooming complicated. You see.
What I was about to say is the value is if you are a creative and you know what you are doing, an artist if you like, but the problem is where it's just greed and churning out product.
Yeah, well, on the whole, I sort of think most people work along the principles of do no wrong, or we try to avoid you know, we try and do the best we can. And it's very difficult. I mean, if I had the ability to take my current drawings and tween them using AI and apply, you know, envelopes, you know, like easy envelopes on them, on straight 2D drawings, I would be very tempted, having done that in 3D and in rig sets.
But that's what the same thing that I mean. You, as an artist, as a creative, somebody who is highly skilled and you know what you're doing, then there's value. It's for those who don't have who don't have those skills, who are just trying to churn out generic crap.
It's also the democratisation. Why shouldn't people? Okay, you take the ethical position, you don't rip people off. But why shouldn't people have access to the tools? You know, why shouldn't you be able to? The problem is, if it gets to the stage where there were farming games, 5 or 10 years ago, where everybody had farming games on their phone, and a lot of the way these worked was they would test new versions to see if they were more addictive. And they would do subsets and fly out different versions to different groups of the audience to see what worked. And are we going to end up in the kind of, there was a point where everybody on, if you watch 20 videos on YouTube, you'd end up with Gangnam Style. And it's kind of whether you end up, if it can be organised in a way that you don't end up with dross. And it's about, to some extent, it's about curation. Because I think that one of the things about this, all this stuff, curation is really important about how you do this. I was at BBC in Manchester last week, and they showed us some stats on children's stuff. And for the under 6s, 70% of parents still trust the BBC more than YouTube and things like that. People do still trust those things, but you know, we've got to have, and I think that's understandable, absolutely understandable. You know, but it's the care we put into society about these things.
Can I mention something I forgot to say? Wasn't in the scope, but don't forget a large part of the animation industry is real time. That is gaming, live interactions, heavily mathematical, heavily processing into and learning about all sorts of things. And that's probably a specialisation we haven't got. I just didn't want us to forget that is a huge industry as well. It's not non-animation, it's a huge part. In fact, it's bigger than Hollywood, isn't it? So.
Ruth, I mean, what you said a moment ago was quite frightening, that someone had produced, if I got this right, someone had produced something of festival quality.
Well, I use festival quality, like, loosely. It was watchable, you might or might not have guessed that it was AI.
But was it all AI, or what? Because a lot of this
It's written by AI, voiced by AI.
Right.
Yeah, but it's made by someone very experienced with AI, who's very skilled at doing the prompts, at working. You know what when it gives you something, what you choose, what you reject. It's not like you press a button and it happens. And I thought, I can't remember who said it, but someone said something about, oh well, AI, you know, films are useless because the writing is useless. I think there's always going to be jobs for people with ideas, people who can, you know, have really good ideas. But, you know, if I'm teaching my students and they want to go and work at DreamWorks, God help them, there's not going to be work for those people who animate hair movings. That, I mean, that is, it seems obvious, is going to be taken on by AI if it isn't already. You know, a lot of those more technical jobs are surely going to go. And the question is, how much do we care about that, I think. I feel about it a little bit like I did about the closing of the coal mines. You know, it's really sad that people are losing their jobs, but I don't really want my kids to be working at a coal mine, and I don't really want them to be animating hair. But I don't know, but something You know, it's a choice, isn't it?
But that's a really good point. That comparison is one that's come up a lot. So I'm in the AI world fully for a few years now. I've seen, I think the problem with the coal mines is they were closed down with no other option for people. So there was no, the communities that existed on those industries weren't given another choice. We have a moment now where we can hopefully shift how those skills transition. And I think there are two really strong stories here. One is a story of the big tech firms closing their doors, creating closed language models, hiding their IP, and making it impossible to know where all that data is coming from, and making a lot of money out of it, probably at the expense of other people. Then on the other side, you've got what both of you two have said, is you've got filmmakers who've never had the opportunity to produce films with particular quality or scale because they don't have the budget or the teams or the access of networks. So the AI Film Awards that I ran in May, we had 6 continents represented out of 30 shortlisted people, which I think is pretty unusual for a film festival, especially a new film festival that had no traction previously. The winner was a collaborative duo of 2 women who left the film industry to have children and found it impossible to return, and only returned through meeting on Instagram. One lives in New York, one lives in France. They're called Ethereal Moon, is their duo name. And they've gone back into making films, just the 2 of them, using AI, using NFTs to sell their work and make a living, in a way that they never could have done in the industry. So there's, we don't need to remind ourselves that the industry is a closed shop, very difficult to access, very exclusionary, and this is an opportunity for people to come in a different route and be creative. And I also I think it's really important what you said about access to these tools. That entry point means we're going to get a lot of crap, but you have to have that crap in order to have that democratic access to allow people to come through. So I don't think we should be afraid of crap, as long as it's not exploitative and derivative.
I think,
yeah.
to say one other thing, which was that on top of this thing about if it's possible to influence policy,
Yeah.
the other thing is, on the positive side, is actually to design the tools, be involved in designing the tools.
Yeah.
If you actually think, what do you want as a filmmaker, a storyteller? What is it that you actually, which part of the process you want to involve or be, what is it going to be? Because actually, programmers and large corporations aren't necessarily going to be the people that are going to design good tools. So, coming from base up, it might be really interesting to think about what it is that you want from this. It's coming, but you can probably influence it to some extent by thinking about what tools it is that you want.
And making the ethical use of those tools profitable. That's the really key thing, coming back to the point of channeling the money. If we, as artists and creatives who want to operate ethically, exclude ourselves from the development of these tools, then we leave it in the hands of the people who we don't want it to be in. Whereas if we use them as we create a market for the ethical use for them, or we develop them ourselves, then people will invest in them and the money will, to some extent, I'm being a little idealistic here, but without channeling without proving the market case and the profitability of using things ethically, we have got hope and help.
When it comes to designing a tool, it's a big question how a tool is designed. For example, you mentioned like these charts, and how the traditional animation was done. And it was done through these charts, and all the guys who work in this industry was working with these charts. And for them it was like, okay, this is our like a fundamental thing and where we start from. But it's just one of the points where you can start. And this is just the overall consensus. Okay, this is the easier for us to to draw these frames if we have these charts, and then like these organizations of labor, and sometimes something disruptive happening, like invention of electricity or whatever. Because before you can't even imagine this approach, like okay, the wheel can rotate with some, I don't know, electrical spirits rotating the wheel or whatever. But actually, some scientists prove that it's not spirits. It's not spirit. It's some physical force. But it was unknown before, and I think they just. Sometimes this happens when something expands like a new pocket in reality, or in a physical world, or it's like an invention or something, and it changes the whole approach. And in this case, I just don't know. There are two options. You can go with the previous approach, okay, we can make something easier, twinning is easier, or other thing is easier, but we stick to other to our basic approach, like Disney approach. And this thing looks like it's totally different, because people just talking to these AI bots and getting something back. And as I tried that, most of the time it's something different. And I think this is the main problem there, because I was let's say raised in traditional environment, when you have a goal, you have the beginning and the set of tools to achieve this exact result we all planned. But maybe it will shift the whole paradigm, that your result is not the final thing, your planned result, yeah. And the actual thing is when you play with these different AIs and get some results and just pick whatever you like, and it's never be what you had in your head. Because what I got from working with these tools, I think they kind of try to avoid my exact desire, because it doesn't matter how explicit I would be in explaining what I want to see, it will be a little bit different all the time. You can't just get exactly what you want.
And sometimes I cheat.
Yeah.
You're throwing the question, and it's throws something. It's like, Brian Eno with discrete strategies, where you get that, formulation that it might make you think something, and that is interesting. It is interesting.
This is the problem. It's interesting because you always have this problem between these two, what I want and something unknown, that it's always interesting. Okay, it's exploded, and it was supposed to just man walking on the street, and then AI just animate this explosion, and I was oh, this is unexpected and this is fun, but it's totally offbeat. But it still works for me, like a person who plays with this. It's fun, yeah, but it's just not what I wanted.
It's difficult to corral
into
storytelling. You know, it's often very difficult to curate into the storytelling thing, and sometimes you're reversing out. You're thinking, right, here are these images. How can I use these to tell a story? It's the other way around. So, you know.
Can I recommend now that we have a short break and then come back and see if we can draw some conclusions, put together a census and perhaps even some kind of manifesto and an idea for what to do next. So can I have a big round of applause for our speakers so far?